This backdrop that voters head to the polls in several important states where today might be seen as a test run for the 2020 presidential race 1 year away. Two of those gubernatorial candidates just voting a couple of minutes ago. We've got our NBC News team here with the latest development from court and both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. We're also talking with a congressman from one of the committees leading the impeachment investigation. That's in a couple of minutes, but we want to start outside district court here in Washington. Ken Delaney is outside. Roger Stone, Ken, is inside, right? This is kind of the scene setter, if you will, the stage setter for his trial. Talk through us what it's about and what we can expect.
That's right, Hallie. Look, Roger Stone, as you said, is one of Donald Trump's oldest confidants. He's been with him for decades. And we all remember that Roger Stone, during the 2016 campaign, claimed to have had advanced knowledge that WikiLeaks had those hacked Democratic emails that everyone knew came from the Russians. And for a time, it seemed that Stone was the linchpin in Robert Mueller's efforts to prove that the Trump campaign coordinated with the Russians. Stone never cooperated, and Mueller never made that case. But in January, the Mueller team arrested and indicted Stone and charged him with misleading the House Intelligence Committee as part of their Russia investigation, and also with obstruction of justice and witness tampering. Accused him of threatening his associate, Randy Credico. So we have jury selection underway today. Hallie, we may see opening statements by the end of the day. Could be a 2-week trial, and I think it's going to be a colorful one. For example, prosecutors are asking the judge to play a clip from the movie The Godfather 2, in which Michael Corleone intimidates a potential witness against him by bringing his brother from Italy. And the reason they're doing that is because they allege that Roger Stone tried to use the same tactic to intimidate Randy Credico and said, pull a Frank Pentangeli. So far, the judge has not allowed the prosecutors to enter this, but she hasn't ruled it out. It could be a fun one, Hallie.
Interesting to say the least. And that's a pretty quick timeline, Ken, if you're thinking that maybe we could see opening statements today or even tomorrow. Can you talk through, though, somebody who may be watching some of this from the West Wing, a guy that I cover every day, President Trump? What could this all mean for him?
Hallie, I think it's the sleaze factor. Donald Trump will be mentioned at this trial. There's a Netflix documentary about Roger Stone in which Donald Trump is quoted extensively, calling Roger Stone a quality individual. But at this trial, prosecutors are going to portray Stone as a corrupt individual, a rogue operator. And Stone himself has embraced the idea of being a dirty trickster. And so if Stone is convicted and sent to prison, he'll be the latest in a long line of people very close to Donald Trump who were exposed as felons and sent to prison. And in the context of everything else that's going on with impeachment, as lawmakers evaluate Trump's conduct, that's going to be a factor, I think. And it will also, this trial will expose the extent to which the Trump campaign was pursuing those hacked emails that everyone knew came from Russian intelligence, Hallie.
Ken Delaney live for us there in Washington. I know you'll be on top of it, Ken. Thank you much. Speaking of impeachment, by the way, there are new developments on that front over on the Hill. Jeff Bennett is there. Hans Nichols is at the White House. So, Jeff, we expect at some point today a couple of other key transcripts kept secret until now to be revealed by these House investigators. And a couple of witnesses ended up being no-shows, huh?
Yeah, look, this is a developing trend, Hallie, of White House officials who are now thumbing their nose at Congress, who are not showing up for testimony when summoned or, in most cases, subpoenaed. So today, House investigators were set to hear from Wells Griffith. He's a National Security Council official. His behind-closed-doors deposition was supposed to start at 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock came and went, no sign of him. In fact, Jamie Raskin, who is a member of one of the investigative committees, just came up and told a group of reporters that that deposition is not happening. Later this afternoon, House investigators were hoping to hear from Michael Duffy. He is an official with the White House Budget Office. I was told yesterday that he is not going to appear. So the two of them are the latest in a long list of officials who have been called for testimony this week who are not showing up. And I'm told that House Democrats aren't at all surprised by that. They, in fact, expected it. In fact, two of the big guns they had scheduled for this week, Rick Perry, the Energy Secretary, of course, and John Bolton, President Trump's former national security advisor, both of them also not expected to appear. So this week, House investigators are using this week to really wrap up the private fact-finding mission that they've been on for the last month as they move to a more public portion of this impeachment inquiry with public hearings, which could begin as early as next week. Now, an important part of this process is the release of these transcripts, which you mentioned. function. So yesterday, we got the transcripts of Marie Yovanovitch and Michael McKinley, two State Department officials who painted a picture of the political pressure being assigned to people, the State Department officials, as Rudy Giuliani and his two now indicted associates for running that pressure campaign at President Trump's behest. That is the allegation that Democrats make. Today, Adam Schiff says that he's going to release the behind closed door the transcripts of Ambassador Kurt Volker and Gordon Sondland, two of the so-called three amigos who were deputized by President Trump, as alleged by witness testimony, to run that shadow State Department campaign to pressure Ukraine's officials to manufacture dirt on the Biden salad.
And that'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. And I know, Jeff, there's already been some information based on reporting from our sources that we have on Volker and Sondland's testimony. But it's one thing to hear it from others. It's another to read it ourselves. And we will have a chance to do that, Hans. So will folks inside the White House, right? They've not been happy, I think, with the way that this process has unfolded. As the president, you were in Kentucky with him last night, really went off yet again on this whistleblower.
Like this, the president's hinted at this the last 48, 72 hours, where he's gone back and forth that we're going to find out damaging information about the whistleblower. And you had that moment that you referenced
and releasing
in the
no
beginning.
Evidence to back it up, right, Hans? Let's just be real clear on that. Yeah.
Correct. And nor has the president said affirmatively that he knows exactly who the whistleblower is. Rand Paul seems to think he knows who the whistleblower is, and Rand Paul wants the press to print that. But the president, remember about 4 weeks ago when you asked him in the Oval whether or not the president wanted the identity to be known, and he came pretty close to saying they were working on finding the identity, but they have not publicized it yet. That said, the president is raising this idea that he's very suspect, or she, very suspect is what he said in a local interview, and then have a listen to how he put it last night.
I actually went and released the actual conversation. And you haven't heard about the whistleblower after that, have you? Because the whistleblower said lots of things that weren't so good, folks. You're going to find out.
Now, behind the president right there, you see the Read the Transcripts T-shirts. Those came in about 30 minutes before the president arrived. All those supporters wearing white shirts, red letters, Read the Transcripts. That seems to be the line of defense that the White House is falling back on. I will tell you, though, when you listen to what the president said on Friday night in Tupelo, Mississippi, and then what he said last night in Kentucky, they seem to be acknowledging, the president himself, that he is actually, although his name isn't on the ballot, for all intents and purposes, it will be. And he said last night to his supporters, you can't let me down. It'd be a horrible thing if that happens. So there's an acknowledgement that the White House needs to have victories in the two gubernatorial races today. There's a third that will be held on Saturday in Louisiana. That's why the president has been spending so much political capital by traveling to these places. And you look at his Twitter feed this morning, it's clearly on his mind. They are thinking about what the results will be and what it will say in terms of a barometer for Republican support on impeachment. Hallie?
Hans Nichols at the White House, Jeff Bennett on the Hill. Thanks to you both. I want to bring in Nayyera, who served in the Obama administration as a White House senior director, also as a senior advisor at the State Department. And I think it's worth fact-checking the president here when he says the whistleblower said lots of things that weren't so good. I don't need to tell probably people who watch this show a fair amount, and if you don't, much of what the whistleblower said in that initial complaint has been corroborated by the transcript, that rough call summary that the White House itself put out. Yet the president seems to want to continue to try to put doubts in people's minds here about
Well, that's part of what they're going to do, because the process isn't going in their favor. Everything is now transparent. It's working according to the rule of law. The facts aren't in their favor, because as we see now from all of these transcripts, there is plenty of corroboration of how there was a campaign effectively within the White House to manipulate the State Department, to manipulate diplomats through Rudy Giuliani. I mean, they effectively sicked their goons on career national security professionals and got them to leave so that they can make their own policy and their own Ukraine bribery scheme available. And that's really ultimately what all of these transcripts that are being released are showing. So the whistleblower effectively doesn't matter at this point.
And that's the point that you're hearing from some on Capitol Hill, that, listen, the person triggered the information. We're now getting it from other people, sort of corroborating this information. But you've also got these questions about strategy. The Post had a really interesting piece, and Jim Jordan, I want to play for you, the ranking member on the House Oversight Committee, was out on Fox this morning, and he was not happy with how this process has unfolded. And that's not new, but this part is. Watch.
President Trump didn't do anything wrong, and what the Democrats are doing is partisan, it's unfair, and frankly, it's ridiculous, particularly the way they went about with these secret meetings in the bunker in the basement of the Capitol.
Fact check.
But the Post has kind of an interesting take on this, pointing out that if you look at these transcripts that have been released so far, and I'm curious as to when we see these next two released, they call this the scattershot strategy in the early days of the impeachment inquiry. Trying to find out, even though they are talking about transparency, trying to find out how different pieces of testimony got leaked, quizzing witnesses on this, so on and so forth.
Well, the irony is that there's, of course, Republicans in these depositions as well, right? There are plenty of Republicans who've been part of this process who have held to what the standard of rule of law is. These are legal depositions, and they happen behind closed doors, and now they're releasing the transcript publicly as part of the next phase of the process. What's interesting is that they're going to try to start throwing spaghetti against the wall to see what sticks, and one of the pieces of spaghetti seems to be none of this matters. It's not a big deal, because at the end of the day, if they can't argue the process and they can't argue the facts, they're going to try to dismiss that bribery actually happened.
I'm curious quickly, as a former State Department person, what you are going to be looking for out of, in particular, EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland's testimony that is set to be released at some point.
His is particularly interesting because he technically has no role in the Ukraine. The Ukraine is not part of the European Union. He is the
Although
link.
some have made the point that it is obviously key and important to the way that Europe interacts.
So you can see how they would interact, but he really seemed to supersede anything that Bill Taylor or Marie Yovanovitch, who were the Ukrainian ambassadors, had to say. He reveals the direct link to Donald Trump and the direct link to Secretary Pompeo, and that's where this should get interesting.
Nayyera Hawk, we're watching for that. Thank you much for being with us on set. I appreciate it. We have a ton more show to get to, because if it's Tuesday with the